These are real documented stalking cases. No fiction. No paranormal. Just real events that turned into real nightmares. Imagine feeling eyes on you, knowing someone is tracking your every step. Real fear that no one warned you about. Today, I'm sharing 5 true stories where people were followed, hunted, and trapped in moments of pure terror. Watch carefully. These tales will grip you like nothing else. 1. Cheryl Araujo, 1983 USA. I still remember the silence in that courtroom. It felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. The name Cheryl Araujo was being whispered everywhere in Massachusetts in 1983, but sitting there, listening to the details, it didn't feel like a news story. It felt painfully real. Cheryl was a 21-year-old mother of 2. That night, she walked into a local bar in New Bedford. It was supposed to be just another normal night. Nothing about it looked dangerous from the outside. People were drinking, talking, laughing. But sometimes, the most ordinary places hide the darkest moments. As the night went on, things changed. Men at the bar started watching her. Not the normal kind of glance. It was longer, heavier, the kind of stare that makes your stomach tighten even if you can't explain why. Witnesses later said she looked uncomfortable. That feeling of being watched, of being singled out, was the first warning sign. Then it escalated. Inside that bar, in a back room, she was assaulted by multiple men while others stood by. Some even encouraged it. The horror of that moment wasn't just the crime itself, it was the fact that people were present. They saw, they heard, and still, it continued. When the details came out in court, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a ghost story. It was worse. It was real human cruelty. Cheryl testified publicly, her voice shaking but steady enough to be heard. You could almost feel the fear she must have carried that night, the realization that she was surrounded, trapped, and no one was stepping in. The case became national news. Protests erupted. The bar was eventually demolished. The men were convicted. But even after the verdict, the story didn't end peacefully. The pressure, the media attention, the trauma, it followed her. She moved away to try to escape the spotlight. Imagine surviving something so terrifying, only to feel watched again by cameras, reporters, strangers who knew your name but not your pain. In 1986, just 3 years later, Cheryl died in a car accident in Florida. She was only 25. Sometimes when people talk about being followed stories, they imagine footsteps in the dark or shadows behind them. But Cheryl's story shows a different kind of fear. The fear of being surrounded, targeted, and ignored in a room full of people. There was no ghost in that bar. No haunted house. Just human silence when someone needed help the most. And honestly, that makes it even scarier. 2. Carrie Swenson, 1984 USA. I remember the first time I stood in the mountains of Montana after reading about Carrie Swenson. The air there feels different. Wide. Empty. Beautiful. But when you know what happened in 1984, that same silence starts to feel heavy. Carrie was a 23-year-old world-class biathlete. Strong. Trained. Used to the wilderness. That's what makes this story even more disturbing. She wasn't careless. She wasn't weak. She knew those mountains. On July 15, 1984, she went on a routine training run near Big Sky, Montana. It was something she had done many times before. The trails were familiar. The forest was quiet except for wind moving through the trees. But she wasn't alone. Hidden in those woods were Don Nichols and his son Dan Nichols. They were survivalists who had been living off the grid. For weeks, they had been watching hikers, studying them, waiting. Imagine running through the forest, and not knowing that someone is watching you from behind trees. When they stepped out with rifles, everything changed in seconds. Carrie was suddenly facing armed men in the middle of nowhere. No cell phone. No nearby houses. Just miles of forest. They told her they wanted her to marry Dan and live with them in the wilderness. At first, it sounds unreal, like something from a horror movie. But it wasn't fiction. It was happening in broad daylight. Carrie tried to stay calm. She talked. She reasoned. She looked for a chance to escape. You could almost feel her mind racing, calculating distance, terrain, timing. Every second mattered. Then she made her move. She ran. A gunshot exploded through the trees. The sound must have echoed through the valley. She was shot and fell. The pain was immediate, but the fear was worse. Because she knew if she stopped fighting, she might never leave those woods alive. By pure coincidence, two men hiking nearby heard the shot. They came toward the sound. That moment changed everything. A confrontation followed. More gunfire. Don Nichols was killed. Dan Nichols was captured later. Carrie survived. When you think about being followed, most people imagine footsteps behind them at night. But this was different. This was real predators hiding in daylight. Planning. Watching. Waiting. Even now, when I think about those mountains, I don't imagine ghosts. I imagine how quiet it must have been before the rifle appeared. How normal everything felt seconds before it turned into a fight for survival. And that is what makes this story stay with you. Because sometimes the scariest thing in the forest isn't something supernatural. It's knowing someone has been watching you the entire time. 3 Rebecca Schaefer, 1989 USA. I remember the first time I read about Rebecca Schaefer. At first, it felt like a Hollywood story. Bright lights, TV fame, smiling interviews. But the deeper I looked, the darker it became. And what scared me most was not how it ended, but how long it had been building. Rebecca was only 21 years old. She had just started becoming known from the TV show My Sister Sam. Young, talented, and full of plans. From the outside, her life looked perfect. But somewhere, someone was watching her life in a very different way. Robert John Bardo had been obsessed with her for years. He wrote letters. He collected photos. When she once appeared in a movie scene that upset him, his obsession turned darker. It stopped being admiration. It became control. What chills me is how easy it was for him to find her. In 1989, there was no internet tracking apps. Yet he hired a private investigator who got her home address through DMV records. Just like that. No alarms. No warning. On July 18, 1989, he went to her apartment in Los Angeles. I tried to imagine that morning. Rebecca was home alone. She was expecting a script delivery. The doorbell rang. That simple sound, something we all hear every day, became the last normal moment of her life. She answered the door. He stood there holding a flower and a letter. She told him politely not to come back. She closed the door. For a few minutes, everything seemed calm again. But he didn't leave. He came back. When she opened the door the second time, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the chest. It happened in seconds. Neighbors heard the sound. Sirens followed. But it was too late. She died later that day. What stays with me is not just the violence. It's the feeling of being watched long before that day. The letters. The obsession. The quiet buildup that nobody around her could fully see. After her death, laws changed. The Driver's Privacy Protection Act was passed to prevent strangers from accessing personal address records so easily. Anti-stalking laws became stronger. But that change came at a terrible cost. When people think of horror, They imagined dark alleys or haunted houses. But Rebecca's story happened in daylight, in her own home, after opening her own front door. And sometimes I think, how many times have we opened the door without knowing who has been watching us from a distance? There were no ghosts in that hallway, just obsession. And that is what makes it unforgettable. For Kelsey Smith, 2007 USA. I still remember watching the surveillance footage for the first time. It looked so normal that it almost hurt. A young girl walking through a parking lot, holding her phone, heading toward her car. Nothing about it looked dangerous. That's what makes this story stay with me. Kelsey Smith was 18 years old. It was June 2nd, 2007, in Overland Park, Kansas. She had just finished shopping at Target. She was laughing on the phone with her boyfriend. Her parents were expecting her home for dinner. It was early evening, bright outside, cars moving in and out of the lot, families walking past. Completely ordinary. But someone was watching her. Edwin Hall had been sitting in his truck. Witnesses later said he had been circling the parking lot, waiting, looking for someone alone. The security cameras show Kelsey walking to her car. She unlocks it, gets inside, and then, in seconds, everything changes. Hall forces his way into her car. No loud scream caught on camera. No dramatic scene. Just a door closing. That silence is what makes it terrifying. When she didn't come home, her parents knew something was wrong. They contacted police quickly. Time started moving differently after that. Every minute felt heavier. Police asked Target for the surveillance footage, but at first, there were delays because of company policy. Hours passed. Her parents kept pushing. They knew waiting was dangerous. Eventually, the footage was reviewed. They saw the abduction. They identified Hall through his truck and cell phone records. But it was already too late. For days later, Kelsey's body was found in a wooded area in Missouri. She had been assaulted and killed shortly after being taken. I can't stop thinking about how normal that day looked. The bright parking lot. The routine stop at a store. The phone call with someone she loved. Nothing about it felt like the beginning of a horror story. And yet it was. After her death, laws changed. The Kelsey Smith Act was passed in Kansas, allowing law enforcement to quickly access cell phone location data during emergencies. Her parents turned their grief into action, so other families wouldn't lose precious hours. When people talk about being followed, they imagine footsteps behind them in the dark. But this happened under security cameras, in public, in daylight. Sometimes the fear isn't in the shadows. It's in the normal moments, when everything feels safe, and someone has already decided you are their target. And that thought is what still unsettles me the most. 5 Shauna Grice, 2016 UK. I remember reading about Shauna Grice late at night, and what disturbed me most was not just what happened to her, but how many times she tried to stop it before it was too late. Shauna was 19 years old, living in Brighton, England. She had recently ended a short relationship with a man named Michael Lane. For her, it was over. For him, it wasn't. At first, it seemed like something many people experience: unwanted messages, constant calls, showing up unexpectedly. But it didn't stop. It escalated. He followed her. He waited outside her workplace. He turned up at her house. Shauna reported him to the police multiple times. She showed them evidence, messages, proof that she was scared. But instead of treating her as someone in danger, at one point, she was even fined for wasting police time. Imagine that feeling. You know someone is watching you. You know they are not going away. And when you ask for help, you are not believed. The fear must have felt constant. Not loud. Not dramatic. just always there, like a shadow that refuses to leave. On August 25, 2016, that shadow became real. Michael Lane went to her home. He hid inside the house. When Shauna returned, he attacked her and slit her throat. She was found later by her boyfriend. He had been planning it, watching her routine, waiting for the right moment. When I think about this case, what stays with me is the buildup. The weeks before. The slow increase in fear. The way someone can slowly invade your life until there is no safe space left. There was no haunted building, no dark forest, just a normal home on a normal street. After her death, there was public outrage. The police admitted serious failures in handling her complaints. Policies were reviewed. Stalking laws and procedures were strengthened. But again, change came after loss. When people hear, being followed, they imagine footsteps behind them at night. But Shauna's story shows something more terrifying, being followed in broad daylight, through messages, through streets, through your own front door. And the worst part? She knew. She felt it coming. She tried to stop it. And still it happened. Sometimes the scariest stories are not about ghosts and empty houses. They are about warnings that were real and ignored. And that is what makes this one impossible to forget.